A warning is now coming from a place few expected. The editorial board of the Washington Post, a publication known for its progressive leanings, is calling for tighter SNAP eligibility standards across the United States. The reason is not political theater. It's a growing fraud scandal in Minnesota that has exposed deep cracks in the system and raised urgent questions about accountability, oversight, and leadership. At the center of the storm is Minnesota Governor Tim Walz. For years, Minnesota was promoted as a national model for social assistance programs. But that image is now under serious threat as federal investigators uncover what they describe as widespread abuse involving taxpayer-funded aid programs. SNAP, the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, is now considered one of the federal programs most vulnerable to fraud. And Minnesota's situation has become a case study in how weak oversight can allow abuse to expand unchecked. What makes this moment especially significant is who is raising the alarm. The Washington Post editorial board has never endorsed a Republican presidential candidate in its entire history. And yet, it is now openly criticizing Minnesota's leadership, calling for reforms that many politicians had avoided discussing for years. That alone should tell you how serious this situation has become. This is no longer a partisan debate. It is a reckoning. Federal agencies are now applying intense pressure. The Department of Health and Human Services has cut off childcare funding tied to the investigation. The Department of Agriculture is examining SNAP fraud allegations. The Department of Labor is investigating unemployment insurance abuse. Homeland Security and the Department of Justice are executing search warrants, reportedly moving door to door. This is not a symbolic response. It is a full-court federal press. According to investigators, billions of dollars may have been improperly distributed over several years. And unlike massive federal budgets that can absorb losses, this is state-level damage, money that Minnesota simply cannot afford to lose. For many Americans, this story goes far beyond politics. Millions of families rely on assistance programs to survive. These programs exist to help the most vulnerable, children, the disabled, and low-income households. But when fraud is allowed to flourish, those who truly need help are the ones who suffer most. Investigators say some of the funded programs never even existed. Food programs for hungry children were approved in locations that had no functioning kitchens. Autism treatment centers were funded on paper but never opened their doors. Facilities were registered, money was distributed, and oversight failed to follow. These were not minor accounting errors. They were systemic failures. And when billions of dollars are involved, responsibility does not stop at mid-level administrators. Accountability travels upward, straight to the highest levels of state government. Critics argue Governor Walz failed to act early, failed to tighten controls, and failed to respond decisively as warning signs appeared. Instead, they say, leadership deflected responsibility and delayed reforms. What's different now is that even traditionally liberal media outlets are investigating this story aggressively. The political cover that once protected state leadership is rapidly disappearing. Some analysts are now asking a question that would have seemed unthinkable just a year ago. Will this scandal define Minnesota politics in 2026? At one point, Governor Walz was discussed as a potential national figure, even floated as a vice presidential contender. Today, the conversation has shifted dramatically from political ambition to political survival. And the scrutiny is only intensifying. But there's another side to this story that deserves attention. Many Americans are asking whether it took a scandal of this magnitude to finally expose how vulnerable these programs are. Was it necessary for fraud to reach such an extreme level before real reform became unavoidable? That question is uncomfortable, but unavoidable. Because when systems lack accountability, abuse becomes inevitable. And when abuse becomes widespread, public trust collapses. This moment may mark a turning point, not just for Minnesota, but for how social assistance programs are managed nationwide. And then, the conversation took an unexpected turn. Former President Donald Trump and actor George Clooney became embroiled in a public exchange that added another layer to the national debate. Trump criticized Clooney in a post on Truth Social, pointing to France's rising crime issues and accusing the actor of lecturing Americans while living overseas. Clooney fired back, saying he agrees with making America great again, and that change would begin in November. The response raised eyebrows. Critics questioned how seriously Americans should take political commentary from celebrities who no longer live in the country. Others pointed out that Clooney had attended major political fundraisers just days before President Joe Biden's disastrous 2024 debate performance, yet remained silent at the time. It was only later, when public concern became impossible to ignore, that Clooney spoke out. For many viewers, the moment underscored a growing disconnect between celebrity activism and everyday American realities. And as this debate plays out on social media, federal investigators continue their work quietly, methodically, without press conferences or sound bites. Search warrants are being executed, financial records are being reviewed, and the consequences, whatever they may be, are still unfolding. One thing is now clear. This story is far from over. What began as a state-level fraud investigation has evolved into a national conversation about trust, responsibility, and the future of America's social safety net. And in the months ahead, the question won't just be who is held accountable, but whether meaningful reform finally follows. Because for the millions of Americans who depend on these programs, the cost of failure is simply too high.